Welcome to the Do More podcast, where we share strategies and tips for improving your life in every aspect. Here's your host, John Farling.
All right, welcome back to the Do More podcast. I'm your host, John Farling. Today, we've got a special treat. Special is probably the key word. Maybe treat, I'm not sure. But we've got my good friend, Terry Royce here.
The treat's extra.
I'm trying to introduce you here. Can you please stop? He was supposed to send me an email, give me his background, so we don't have that. He never sent it. I will give him credit. He was early, and I had technical difficulties with my mic and my speakers, but we're rolling here. So Terry, since you didn't send me an email telling me about yourself, can you give us 2 to 20 minute bio about yourself and go ahead and brag? Give us everything.
Sure, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm a big John Farling fan, so just like a little fanboy over here. Not just kidding, man. I love you, man. I've got to know you pretty well over the last 3 years, so I truly do appreciate having this conversation here today with you, and I appreciate all the side conversations we've had over the years. Yeah, man. I mean, what do you want to know? There's we could unpack or pack in as much or little as you want.
Well, let's start with, because I'm interested in knowing, and you have your own podcast, and we'll plug it, the Self-Storage Playbook Podcast, which I think is a great podcast. So we know a little bit about you, but take us back before you got into storage, before you got into wholesaling. I think you're bartending, right? What was that transition from bartending to getting into real estate, or just leaving bartending in general? What happened there?
Yeah, man. So I worked in the restaurant business in Federal Hill, which is a neighborhood in Baltimore, for about 8 years. Worked at 2 different popular bars down there, and actually just jumped right over the bartending gig. I was like a barback / glorified busboy at Mother's in Federal Hill for about 4 years. And then I worked at another bar across the street for 3 or 4 years as a manager there. So I just kind of skipped the bartender role, but I served a lot of drinks in the process. I just never had the label. But it was fun, man. And during that time, I was kind of, it was right after college. And then I was like, okay, well, I should probably get a job, and I actually worked for CoStar for 3 months. And then it was a good entry level gig. And I left to go work for the city of Baltimore in the planning department while I was working at these bars. And I worked at the planning department for a year. I thought that was going to be like urban planning, like, adaptive reuse and all that stuff. And it was just I won't say a nightmare, because that's a little exaggeration, but I just like saw all the people around there that had been there for a long time. And I was like, man, these people just don't seem like they have any souls left. And it just kind of hit me. And I was working at the bar the whole time. So I was working about 80 hours a week between the two. And I just made this shift. I was like, okay, well, this isn't where I want to go. And I just left the city job. And then I was working as the manager in the manager role full time. That was my transition there. And during those 3-4 years, while I was even at the city, I started doing a lot of research and reading. Before Bigger Pockets, there was another forum. I'm drawing a blank, and it was actually Tim Randall's forum, who and just reading about real estate and wholesaling. And I was just like, okay, this seems like a way to create, not just make money, but create wealth. And I started dipping my toe in the water. And while I was at that job, at the bar, I wholesaled my first house, and made I think we made like $18,000. And that was just like awesome. And then the second house I made like 500. And then it was like 8 months till I wholesaled another house. But I realized that, the effort you put in to that business, you might not get an immediate result. And that's the tough thing. I think a lot of people get burned out. They want like quick feedback and quick money. But I realized, man, if you really like put the work in here, there's real money and real success to be made over time. And taking that persistence after that first year and a half, I started to get some consistency, and then we grew that business. And I think over the last 10 years, I probably wholesaled and flipped around 750 houses.
Wow.
we were doing at the tail end of my wholesaling business, we were doing about 80 to 100 houses a year. We had a team of about 8 or 9 people. It was a real,
I'm gonna stop you there. So you started wholesaling, what were you, about 25, 26, somewhere in there?
Oh man, it was like 2008. I'm a calculator kid. So that was, I guess 15 years ago. So, I'm 25. So I was 10.
That's great.
I'm 41. Yeah. So I was about 25, 26.
And that's, at least to me, that's pretty early to have that shift, that mentality shift. Cause one, a lot of people don't hit that. I probably didn't have that till we were pregnant with our first kid. So I was probably 32, I think. So why, other than, and don't skip on Tim Randall here. Sounds like you have a lot to owe to Tim Randall, right?
Yeah. And I've actually thanked him. I was like, dude, I used to read your board all the time, man. And just like, I'm really drawing a blank on what the name of it was. I can like picture it. It was like a blue message board, like a little bit old school style. He sold that business to somebody else. But yeah, I used to read on there and I was like, just trying to understand the mechanic. I remember going to the library because, you'd see all these books on like rental houses. I remember going to Barnes and Noble when there was Barnes and Nobles around at the Inner Harbor.
They're still around.
There's one in Ohio. It's like the original. But I was like asking the lady for books on wholesaling, like real estate. I was like, yeah, there's got to be something. And there was nothing at the time. So I had to, just learn almost to a fault by stumbling my way through reading message board posts and blog posts and all this. Like I was highly skeptical of coaches and programs to a fault. So I never. Why do
you think you had that skepticism?
I don't know. That's actually a great question.
Thank you.
That'll be the last time I compliment you. And I still have a lot of that today in different areas, and it's something that I'm aware of, and I don't know that where that's rooted in, but I know that it doesn't always serve me. So I try to, when I become aware of that, I actually try to like take a step back and say like, okay, what is the reason? And to be honest, at the surface level, it's probably because just a lot of, there's a lot of people that oversell and underdeliver like products like that, in my opinion. But that's why I said your question's great, because there probably is some kind of deeper issue with that, with rooted in trust. And for those people listening that are looking for mentors and coaches, that have my same skepticism, my advice to you would be to find somebody or a group of people that you trust, that you can like lean on, and whether that be another individual or a RIA or some sort of coaching group. I think there is a lot of value in different groups depending on your journey. And that's why for storage, I got a coach and mentor. I knew that was a blind spot for me, or a weak spot, and I had somebody that I knew that I trusted. And I went in on that, just not knowing what step 2 was, but saying, okay, well, if I sign up for step 1 with this group and these people I trust, then the likelihood of me getting to step 3, 4 is quicker and faster, and actually getting there is significantly higher. So I guess the reason I bring that up is I knew my patterns looking back and was aware of them. And I tried to not make the same mistake when I decided to pivot into storage.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get back to your wholesaling business, but how many masterminds have you been in or mentors, combined both of them?
Really only 3, I guess. If you consider like ongoing groups, I've been in 3 groups.
Which is a lot, which you're still active in 2 of them, right?
No, only one. I'm in 1 storage group right now. Oh no, I'm sorry, 4, because I'm in Front Row Dads, which is like a group that's mainly focused around like parenting and families with like, but it's mostly business owners, which is an amazing group that I highly recommend. So yeah, I've been a part of 4 groups, and I'm still in 2 of them. I'm in a storage group and then in Front Row Dads. And I think it can be a lot. And I think a lot of people try to be a part of a lot of things. And as the years have gone on, I've become aware of that too, and tried to downsize that to focus on, the people and the feedback and support I get in the groups that I'm part of, not trying to be spread too thin.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a good point there, because you start on Tim Randall's free forum. I'm assuming it was free, and you did a couple deals, and then you saw there's value in this. And my guess is you probably saw someone else doing the same thing. I don't want to say guru, but kind of a guru, someone that, that would be more of like a mentor. And you're like, you know what? That's working this far. I need to now invest in myself, invest more into it. And that's probably when you start leaning into mentors and masterminds, right?
And it was a while, to be honest. I'm trying to think, the first group that I joined was Life on Air. And I want to say that might have been like 2016, 2017.
And that's less business related, right? More life related.
I think it's a good hybrid. I mean, a lot of people that aren't familiar with Life on Air, some people, I mean, I don't know why, but they're like, they find the message funny, which I think they have some messaging mismatch sometimes at least. But dude, Life on Air.
Funny, the word you wanted to use?
What's that?
Is funny the word you wanted to use there?
I'm not sure. My goldfish mind's already on to the next thing. But Life on Air, man, I got to tell you, my coaches, Chuck Bauman, who he passed away last year or the year before, and Ken Holmes were the two co-coaches of that group, who Ken. That group made a massive impact, and them in particularly on the trajectory of my life and business, and just like having that well-rounded message. So that was a great group for where I was at in time. Like I was going 100 miles an hour, like growing the business. They didn't have any dog in the race except to make sure that I got what I wanted, and that, and my family got what I wanted. And I think a big part of the value of that group is that couples can go together. And so me and my wife would go to that group and be on the coaching calls together. So it wasn't just what I wanted or what I thought I wanted. It was like, we had to kind of ping pong off each other, and the coaches, they would say, well, Kristen said this and Terry said this, and how can we mesh all that together? And that was hugely valuable. And I think that's the kind of the problem with a lot of people that do business coaching and life coaching. They're in a silo by themselves, right? If I'm telling you what I want and you're encouraging me to go after it or giving me the steps or feedback, it's a one-way street, right? And you're kind of, I think a lot of people do that. And then the kids and their spouse suffer some of the consequences of it not being well-rounded, for lack of a better term. And that's why I think that group was so impactful for me, because it made me realize like some of the things I was doing for the business weren't always serving my family, and there was a way to get both. And I think a lot of people look at that as settling or not playing full out, when I think the real thing is they're settling in other areas of their life. But if you can get all of what you want, like that's what I think most people don't have. So, and I wouldn't say that I've got there. I think all of us always have work to do. I'm a big believer in that. When you get to a 9, it's a lot harder to go from a 9 to a 9.1 than it is to go from a 3 to a 4.
Yep. That's a good point. So let's back up a little bit. So it sounds like wholesaling business started around 2005, 2006. You joined Life on Air 2000, what'd you say, 15, 16? So basically
16,
around
17.
Yeah. So around 10 years, what did your business look like the first 10 years before you had true coaching? And then how did that evolve after you started getting coaching?
Kind of what I was already hitting on, right? Like for the first couple of years, I mean, I was, doing deals and kind of doing a lot of like JV partnerships on wholesales. But the evolution of the business got way more successful before I joined Life on Air in particular. But what Life on Air brought to the table for me, and having those coaches and mentors who were really like vested in just like calling out my BS, was just calling attention to my blind spots. And I actually heard this on a Front Row Dads podcast. The guy was like, that John Vroman, the founder of Front Row Dads, he was interviewing, and the guy was talking about blind spots. And he was like, we all think we want to work on our blind spots, right? You're like, oh man, like I have this blind spot over here. I have this blind spot here. He was like, you don't know what your fucking blind spots are. He was like, they're blind spots. He's like, what you're working on are your weaknesses because you're aware of them. He's like, that's why you need, and I'm probably butchering this a little bit. He's like, but that's why it's important to have the right people and the right coaches and the mentors, because when they call that out, they're going to see those blind spots that you don't, because you're blind to them, sometimes consciously and sometimes, unconsciously. I think we push things down because we're like, oh, well, that's not a big deal or this, and that doesn't matter. But when you have that person that is vested in calling you out and not, worrying about like, are your feelings going to be hurt or not by this? Because really it's in your best interest. I think that is a huge value. And I think that's tough. I think the other thing is, to be honest, a lot of people, it's tough to hear when they have feedback that challenges their worldview or of their business, their life, their marriage. It's uncomfortable shit to hear. I mean, that's point blank. Like I can tell you that I've sat on calls and sat in coaching rooms with some of those guys, and it wasn't fun stuff to hear, because when they call it out and then other people in the room call it out, and then if your wife's in the room and she calls it out, right? Like,
yep.
It's not just, oh, well, shut up, John. Like you don't understand. It's like, no, like these, and it's not to be malicious or break you down, but to make you better. Right. And that's why I think a lot of people fragment from what I would consider true coaching or true mentoring, because they want feedback that challenges them a little bit, but reinforces their current worldview or their current situation.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And well, I more than likely when you joined Life and Air and any of these other groups, you probably thought you were setting the world on fire at the time, right? You probably thought, I've got this great business, I'm doing all these great things. And then you join this group and they're kind of just busting your bubble, like, hey, you're not doing it that great. You can change these things and it could be better.
Yeah. And a lot of times it was the small shift, right? I mean, you shift a couple of degrees here, a couple of degrees there. And then over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, it becomes a big shift, because you're talking about trajectory changes, right? Like you shift 2 degrees and you go 3, 4, 6 months, and then you shift another 3. Like if you graph that out geometrically, right, that's going to become a big shift. You're talking about, you're on a straight line. I don't know, camera's inverse. If you're on a straight line, you shift 3 degrees, and then over the course of time, then you shift another 3. And then in a year and a half, you're a massive departure from your original trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. So wholesaling business for what, 15 years, you were the largest wholesaler on the East Coast. We're going to plant the flag there and say that.
That's
so
false.
You were in Life and Air. What happened from there to when you got into storage? What was the next shift? Because obviously there's time in your timeline. There's big time shifts here from what I can see that has brought you to different places in your life. I'm assuming it's made things better. So what's happened after wholesaling? You did have a huge wholesaling business by my understanding. You had a team of how many people?
It was probably between 8 and 10. I mean, there was me and my wife and I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a partner the entire time, but the last like 4 to 6 years I did. So it was him and his wife. And then we had, so there's 4 of us plus 3 guys in the field, plus 2 people in the office. And then we had some VAs. So, I mean, if you count all of those people, it was probably 12 to 13.
Yeah. I mean, that's a legit business, especially a legit wholesaling business. So then what happened after that? So after during Life and Air, after 2015, 16, what happens to get you into storage?
So COVID hit, right? And kind of just COVID was a nuisance, of course, in a lot of ways, but I think it was a blessing in a lot of ways. It just kind of gave me this space to take a break because we were buying a lot of courthouse foreclosures. And so all that shut down. And I just wanted something different and wanted to shift. I mean, I love wholesaling. I think it's a great way to make money. And I think really a lot of people look at wholesaling as the end business, but if you create really what wholesaling is you become a marketing or lead machine. And if you have that lead funnel and you can implement other aspects of whether it be buy and hold or flipping, you've got a pretty well-rounded business. And that's what I loved about it, right? Everyone's like, oh, well, wholesaling isn't real estate investing or wholesaling isn't building wealth. But it's like, well, if you take it by itself, like you could make arguments around that. But we just had a lot going on. And when COVID shut it down, it was just like, I think it kind of gave me permission to make a big switch and go after something different. Right. I mean, I had a team, we had a lot going on. We had, at any given time had like probably 20 to 40 houses under contract because the life cycle of the deal, would be 2 to 4 months at least. And again, I think our highest year we did like 117 transactions. That was not just wholesales, but that was rentals and flips. So all that shut down and it was a good time to pivot. Right. And again, having the people I knew that I was around, a lot of those people were through life. I mean, Ken was one of those people, Ken Holmes from Life on Air. He was doing storage. I was like, okay, I've got all these proof of concepts around me, people that I trust. And it just was the right time. I think it was just right time. COVID was a big factor and made that shift.
And so
I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
about 30% of the way. I'll get it out of you. So you had some rentals. So you sold those off. You had a partner. What'd you guys do with the business? Because obviously that's an asset there. You had rentals. That's an asset. You started getting the storage. How was that transition? What'd you do with the assets?
So we had a buy-sell agreement, which anybody who's got a partnership, I would highly recommend that with assets or even just like, intellectual property processes, like, to set that out so that when you want to depart or your partner dies, they get divorced, you have an off ramp. And that was what I did. Like we had a buy sell agreement. So he bought all the rentals, and we just disposed all of the wholesale deals and, kind of wound down the business. I mean, it's still, even with that buy sell agreement, to like do all that took about a year and a half, I would say. We had 30 or 34 rental properties. A couple of those were like 3 to 6 units. And so it made that part of it easy to some extent. There were still things we had to work through. But that would be a big takeaway for anybody listening that has a partnership that doesn't have a buy-sell agreement, is to implement that. And it seems like a combative conversation to have. It was actually my wife that brought it up at one point. She was like, what happens if you die? Like, I got to deal with all this stuff that we have no plan for. And so when the COVID happened, we already there was a plan in place to work from. I think that's a big, people just want to go 100 miles a minute. I mean, you and I both know people that don't have this kind of stuff in place and have seen various partnerships. They're just like, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Like, right. I don't know what the stat is for business partnerships, but it's gotta be in the high 70, 80% range.
And that's all you hear. You only hear of partnerships that fail. And a lot of times they don't take the time, like what you just said, to sit down and have a buy-sell agreement, get on the same page with things, business plan, everything. I think that's obviously it sounds like you did that after you guys started the business. But you still did it, which is important.
Yeah. That was the thing. We started buying rentals and, we started having in the beginning, it was mostly wholesale deals, but when we started having assets, it kind of created bigger questions. And that was one of the things that, when the question came up that the coaches in Life Linear brought up. They're like, plan it with, they didn't say that, this was when we started having the idea of like the buy sell and what do we do if one of us, something happens. And they said, plan it for the end in mind, right? Like, and they said, fences make happy neighbors. Like if you have all that in, like when things change or somebody dies or somebody just has a change of heart, like it's going to make it a lot easier. And I can't harp on that enough because I've seen people I know and care about have, stress that's created out of not having these agreements. And so I think it's a big point that a lot of people rush past because it's not fun stuff to discuss.
Yep.
Everybody wants to discuss doing deals, making more money, and like building wealth. Well, part of building wealth is protecting your wealth. And that's kind of what that buy sell agreement is, right? It's like a sister plan to like estate planning and stuff like that. I mean, if something happens to you and your partner and you have a bunch of assets and you have no plan to dispose of these or what that looks like, your wealth isn't protected. So,
Yep. That's a good point. Great analogy. So 2020, you knew Mike Wagner, but you joined Mike Wagner's group. You dive into storage. Your first deal's in 21.
My first one was in 2020.
2020.
I bought
okay.
it in April.
So you bought it how soon after diving into storage?
So I would say I started looking into storage in, it was December of 19, like loosely. And then I got kind of serious about it right before COVID. I was like, started looking and checking out deals. And then my next one didn't come for another year. And the one I found, I think COVID helped play a factor in that because I think everyone was like, what the hell is going on with the real estate market? It was like right in the beginning of COVID, like the second week of March. Like I remember flying on the plane. People weren't even wearing masks yet. And like, I always had allergies before I was sneezing and everyone's looking at me like I'm the carrier, like I'm patient zero, and I think people were afraid to buy assets. I think probably anybody obviously with the market who bought anything then got, had a great tailwind at their back.
Yeah. So here's another turning point. You found another mentor. So this is your second mentor. That's probably been a huge projection in your life. So you buy one 2020, you didn't buy one till 2022. Is that right? Is that what you said?
I bought one in 2020. I bought one in 21. Well, the second one in 21. And then I bought two at the tail end of 21, one in the beginning of 22, and one at the end of 22.
But you had like three within like 2 or 3 months, right?
Yeah, those were the ones at the end of 2021. I bought like two in one in November, one in December, and one in January.
And you're up to how many now?
We have 7.
7 and a couple under contract, and you're obviously doing deals and you're still active in it. So where do you think you're going from here? What's your plan? You've got 7 facilities. What's your plan? You've got team. So actually, before I ask that, so what did you learn as far as building a business, building a team from your wholesaling business that you've carried over to storage?
That's I'll give you another compliment. That's a good question.
I had that one written down. Been thinking about that one.
So it's funny when my wife and I started doing storage, we were like, okay, we're going to keep it small. We're going to keep it simple. It's just going to be us. And then even as we had 2 facilities, we realized that the team in the wholesaling business, like, enabled us to step back to let the business run without us. And it would seem obvious coming from a team, but we were just like, okay, we'll keep things simple. We don't need to overcomplicate it and hire and manage people. But as we got into it, we realized that we really liked having the team. Like there's obviously stress points that come from having a team, right? I've gone through one the last week and a half with one of my team members. We discovered a conflict of interest. We weren't sure what was going to happen, where that was going to go. And you have to manage them, right? Like one of the things that I'll be straight up, I haven't been good at with some of my team members, over the last like 6 months, like is just meeting with them. It's like a lot of them just have like kind of repetitive tasks they do. And I haven't been meeting with them to like pour into them, see how they're doing, just check in, make them feel like they're heard and supported. And I had Zooms actually yesterday and the day before with those team members, and just I stepped up and said, look, they didn't say anything about it, but I think it was kind of obvious. And I said, I owned it, and they appreciated that. So I think that's the thing, you're managing different, when you're going to a team versus single operator. When you're the operator, you're managing the books and you're managing the rehabs and you're managing the acquisitions. When you step back to try to really have a true team, you become a manager of emotions and people.
Well, I think too, because I had the same thinking as you. I had 5 facilities, I think. And I'm like, you know what? I'm cool. I'm going to chill. I'm going to write off. Not that I was going to do this, but I kind of had this thinking of, I don't need to crush it and keep going. I think there's power in I don't want to say taking care of people, but giving people, you're creating jobs, right? The more you're producing, the more you're creating jobs, the more, and everyone, I'm guessing everyone that works for you, but everyone that works for me, it's a lifestyle job. They're probably I have a full-time person that's my district manager. I don't know if she works 15, 20. It's hard to track your time, but I don't know if she works 15, 20 hours a week. From what I know, she loves it. And that, to me, that's what's more important than actually doing the deals. It's you're producing, you're making the world a better place. So yeah, my train of thoughts around that has changed, just because you see how powerful it is when you can help other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fun too, right? To take people on the journey with you as you're having success. I think that's what kind of gets understated. I mean, some people talk about it, but I don't know. I feel like that's a big part of it, is to take them along. And I had a conversation with my operations manager yesterday about internal language and like not feeling like things are failed, that we're growing. Like, okay, well, instead of saying I failed at this or this didn't go as well, how about, okay, we learned some things that didn't work as well and we need to reorganize them so that we can be more efficient, right? Like, how does that, and we had a conversation around that, right? Because there's just negative framework, and that's, you're talking about personal growth stuff in that point, and just having, becoming a better like operator, having your team more efficient, having them feel more fulfilled. So
definitely. So to kind of put a bow on your journey here, if you want to tell us what's your portfolio worth today?
Man, I don't know. Like the market value, I don't know. We're in a changing market.
Ballpark.
I'd say the market value is probably, I don't know, between 7 and 9. I'd have to look. Because the cap rates, we'll call are changing. 9. Call it 9.
Yeah, it is. But we'll call it 9 because we know the market's bouncing back at some point. We'll call it 9. So within 3 years, you've accumulated $9 million worth of real estate, and probably work how many hours a week? How many hours a week do you actually have to work?
That's I'll give you another compliment. You took a C question and turned it into a B+.
That's a backhanded compliment.
I love giving you a little smack around backhand. If I only managed my team and didn't do acquisitions, which, I mean, I'd probably, if we weren't acquiring, I'd get rid of it. But if we just maintained what we had, I mean, I could probably work 30 minutes a day.
Yeah.
If that, and I'm just coming up with a number, and that would be mainly just having a meeting. Like my operations guy, as he was a fireman for the DOD, and he retired recently. So during his first 6-7 months, he was working a couple of days on, a couple of days off. And we kind of had a haphazard meeting schedule because of that, like in communication. And now that he retired, we've been having a daily huddle meeting every morning. We had one right before I hopped on with you today for 20 minutes just to make sure we're on the same page. And really that would be most of my work, is managing him, and, probably some things that might be a little bit that he doesn't know that I need to tag in on. And that was a big thing for us too. You were talking about a team, right? We realized, okay, we were at 6 facilities, and I was spending all my time, or a lot of my time, managing the facilities and like doing repairs that needed to be made, or like CapEx stuff. And like, that just wasn't the stuff I love to do. Right. And if I went on vacation and stopped doing it, then like all that stuff went by the wayside. I mean, there's third-party managers you can hire. We've tried that. It didn't work out for us. But I was like, okay, who would be the right person? He had worked as one of our site managers, our boots. And we, said, hey, this guy, he's pretty proactive. He'd be a good fit. And we brought him in on that role. And so I haven't talked other than a couple random texts and, messaging people just to check in on them. Like, he manages all the site managers. He deals with the customer service issues and repairs, all that stuff. And that's allowed me to step out and look at the acquisitions, and free up that time. So that's like when we realized I guess it was probably about a year ago, that we really want a team so that we can have a real business. That's really what's given us the true freedom.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you travel a lot too. You say 30 minutes a day. I mean, I've seen you where you've gone to event to event to event, and then you're going to go look at some deals 2-3 weeks in a row, and you haven't done anything business wise. Right. So you do have the freedom to do that. You kind of, in a way, choose to do more in your business from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's fun. I've talked to you about that before, right? It's like mental chess. You're like strategizing on acquisitions, on like what would be right for the business. So it's I like parts of it, right? But I also like having the option to step back. And that's what I've tried to tell my operations manager. Like, hey man, if you want to go on a vacation, like, we need to have this stuff documented and processized so I can step back in. And help out for that week. And so that's what we're working on now, is like really creating a system, because I think that's the next route we're going, is probably doing more of our operations in-house, because that will actually give it, you can argue both sides of this. It'll give us some freedom and more control over what we can do and not do, like for everything from turnover to auctions, to giving the people who are taking care of customer service leeway on handling issues. So I'm excited for that. We started trialing that stuff this past weekend. That's
cool. Well, I think you've given us a ton of great business and life information on how to do more. There we go. Plug my podcast, how to do more. I got 2 questions for you. 2 last questions, I think. We'll see if this is it. What is one book that's been just completely transformed your life?
Transformed? Wow. That's a big question.
Big question, or is that a big word?
Yeah, the book is a big word. I'll be honest. I'm like ADD when it comes to reading. I read a little bit and then I like get off track. I've probably read, like, the books over on my bookcase. I've probably read.
This is actually a pretty simple question, Terry. We just want a book.
And I'm dodging it because I'm trying to think of because I don't read.
You do read. I know you read. And even if you don't read the whole book, you at least dive into some and you get stuff out of them.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at in your journey too. The one book everyone talks about, I actually recommended it to a friend of mine who's not in real estate the other day, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that's because that's a financial mindset framework book about how to think about money. Well, I'm actually rereading right now Psychology of Money, which is a great book and an easy read. It's like 20 short stories about finance and financial mind or frameworks. And I think that goes a lot into, right, the stories we tell ourselves about money from when we were younger and even recently. Yeah. And I think I like that book because it makes me look at things just differently when it comes to spending money, even on the business, right? Like my operations guy, we're posting a job ad. He was like, oh man, like, he's like, these job sites are so expensive. He's like, this site's $25 a day, or this site's $10 an application. And so I was about to ask him, well, what do you think's the best one? And then I asked, reframe the question. I said, how much do you think it's worth saving to have a C applicant versus a B applicant? Because that's the real question, right? Like if we have a bigger funnel, like, right, if you have a job ad, you're marketing for the right talent for your team. So if we go smaller, do what's cheap or free, or don't do as much, we have a smaller funnel with less applicants to choose from. I said, so that's the question. If maybe we still get a B applicant from the smaller funnel. I said, but let's say we only have 10 people to pick from versus 80. That's the question. What's that worth? How much do you want to save? And it's just reframing stuff like that in your mind, right? About how that is. So that book's really been a good book for me. And then,
so you were only allowed one book. You just said two.
First, she yelled at me for not naming a book and dancing because I don't read. Now I'm too many books. You got to pick one here. I can't. That's how I am.
Psychology of Money. We'll take that. And it's a good point. I've been writing down ideas of what I'd like to talk about on this podcast. And that's one of them is basically psychology of money. Because there's so many things that we're not necessarily taught just as a society. We've kind of been taught, right? It wasn't necessarily our parents. It was society. Like, How many times did you hear growing up, money's dirty, don't pick that money up? Which you may still want to think about that because you may find some fentanyl in $1 you find on the street. But there's so many misconceptions out there about money. Like rich people are the worst people in the world. Anybody that has money, they're snobs, right? There's just so many things. So that's a good point. So my last question is, what do you think is your greatest attribute that has gotten you this far in business and life, everything?
Man, tough. Hit me with the tough. I only like questions that I know the answer to.
You know the answer.
I think it's a mixture of you have to have, persistence and belief. Right? Because then that comes down to environment. I think the belief part is a big factor of environment. A lot of people have people chirping in their ear about I remember when I left my job at the city, my dad was like, he didn't say it verbatim, but it was like, he was like, oh, that's not a good, he didn't think it was a good move. But I didn't have the belief that if I stayed there on that path that I was going to get, would I survive? Would I be okay in life? Sure. Would I have the life I want and the freedom I want? Probably not. I didn't know how it was going to happen, right? I was like, whether it was real estate or selling something else, but I had the belief that wasn't the path and that I knew a couple options that were going to be better. And then the persistence factor when stuff isn't working out how you want, whether it be deals blowing up or business costs are too high, that you can work through all that. That stuff will knock you on your butt day in and day out.
Yep.
So I think those two things, I don't think that there's anything unique about me in that capacity. I just think that I think getting that first wholesale deal done quick gave me also proof of concept. I think a lot of people grind their way through and it can be demoralizing and give up. And that's why I think drafting off of people around you, the confidence and the belief and all that is important. And having that right, book. I'm gonna ignore your thing about Atomic Habits, right? And they talk a lot about that environment-based stuff, right? Whether it be health or work, and the people around you are part of your environment. And so when all those people are knocking you down, you have to be around, put yourself in the right circles, consume the right information, not listen to those people, and go after it. So I don't think anything's unique. I think there's just two things. If you have those two and don't lose sight of it or let other people diminish it, on a long enough time frame, everybody can achieve more than where they're at, right? Might take you 3 years versus me a year or whatever, vice versa. But it's that belief and persistence.
Yep. Well, you say those aren't unique, but They absolutely are. I would say, I don't have a number. I would say there's probably not more than 5% of the world that has both of those. And it's probably a smaller number than that, at least consistently, right? We may all go through periods of where we have belief and periods of where, what was your second one?
Belief and persistence.
Yeah. I think that may be the bigger one. Well, they're probably somewhat related too, but I don't think a lot of people stick with things. I mean, I'm sure you've talked to plenty of people wanting to get into storage. They're all gung-ho, and 60 days later, you hear nothing from them. They haven't done anything. They went back to their 9 to 5. They're in their daily routine. They're on the hamster wheel, and they just keep churning, just keep running on their hamster wheel. So you say that, but I don't think many people are equipped with both those. So kudos to you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
So we're almost 45 minutes in here. I appreciate it, Mr. Terry. You were my first guest on this podcast that we may not make it to episode 6. I don't know. But appreciate having you on. Appreciate you taking the time to come on, and you definitely provide a ton of value.
Yeah, man. I appreciate having you on, and love it. If anybody wants to reach out to me or has any questions, you can hit me up at royceselfstorage@gmail.com. And John, if there's ever anything I can do for you, man, I'll just say this publicly. I appreciate you, and we've had a lot of great conversations, and part of that belief and persistence, right? When I've had doubt about deals or just don't know what's going on with X, Y, and Z, I lean on you. I lean on other people in my circle, and I appreciate that, man. So thank you.
Yep, I appreciate you, and same to you. We both bounce ideas off each other. So again, appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Thanks for following, subscribing, and listening to this episode of the Do More podcast hosted by John Farling. To learn more or ask questions, go to l4investing.com.